Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Decred in Depth. We're not going to wait the 5 minutes because it is 3 o'clock and I have a very special guest with me. Jonathan Chappelow is the project lead on DCR DEX with Brian Stafford and as the technical lead on the project. Sorry for that. And I'm just going to restart. Jonathan is the project lead on DCR DEX with Brian Stafford as the technical lead. And he is also the creator and maintainer of DCR Data, the Decred Block Explorer. So without further ado, hello, Jonathan.
Hi, Eduardo. How's it going? Thanks for having me.
No, thank you for coming. As soon as we got started, I guess I must have clicked a button or something, and then it was the dictation was picking up on my computer, and so like what I was saying was being written on the screen, so it was like a little. But I'm glad we got it figured out.
All right. No
Let's
problem.
let's jump right into these questions, and many of these come from our community. They've been sourced on Twitter, and some of them may be a little confusing, and maybe there might not be necessarily the technical know-how, and so we're just hope that you'll be able to clarify some of the confusion. But before we get into any of that, can you briefly tell us about your background and how you made your way to working for the Decred project?
Yeah, sure, no problem. But no, it's totally fine if there's confusion and lots of questions. That's exactly why I wanted to do this because we badly need this outreach. I'm really happy to have the opportunity to answer these confusing questions. Oh, and I think I lost you. Do you see me, Eduardo?
I hear you and see you perfectly.
Okay, my screen froze for a second, but I guess you hear me just fine. Yeah. Okay. So anyway, let me get to your first question. Who am I? My background is a biomedical engineer. So I guess I come from a very different place, but I guess a lot of people in crypto do. And before I started working exclusively as a Decred contractor, I worked on image analysis algorithms in the medical device industry. So very much software oriented. And fairly early on, I heard, I had an appreciation for Bitcoin and its organizational issues. So when I heard about Decred and its approach to governance about to launch, I decided to get involved in the space. Initially contributing to the Decred project, the open source was really a fun hobby for me, and basically I just started DCR Data in my spare time. Mainly to learn, but as we know, that obviously turned into something bigger. It's our primary block explorer now, and that was with the help of a lot of other people, that very like-minded open source contributors. And just after a while, I decided to put more into the project, and here I am. And I'm pretty positive that others, including Luke, Jamie, Buck, and Joe, probably have very similar stories. I think most people working on the Decred project today, they just show up and start building, and that's kind of how we encourage it to happen. So that's how I got started.
For sure. What is it like working as a dev on the Decred project? How has it changed your perspective about organizational structure and the future of work, if in any way? This
Yeah,
question comes
it has.
from Ellie Herf.
Yeah, it has indeed. Thanks for that question. I guess it's a little fluffy, but it's great. I mean, it's also extremely challenging. Um, I think what's really fantastic is that we're not generally shackled by rigid corporate processes, and we can instead just focus on doing instead of talking and jumping through hoops. I mean, we don't have to put up with pointless meetings, sensitivity training, and other kinds of BS like that, nor commuting for that matter. Yet we remain productive and respectful of each other. So I think it's a really great work environment, and it's proven to be something that will probably be more common in the future. But also, since we're an open source project, this is where things get a little bit trickier. We do all of our work in the public eye. I mean, this is part of it right here, but everyone's watching all the time. That's not unique. That's an open source thing. But with Decred, we're also accountable to a mostly anonymous set of stakeholders. And although I think that the stakeholders give us considerable latitude, we work very, very hard to deliver. And so while we generally enjoy a lot of freedom as Decred devs, we still feel really feel the pressure, and I can't understate how hard the DCR DEX team has pushed to ship this brand new product. Quite some time ago, last year actually, but Buck and Wisdom and Joe Groff in particular have gone the extra mile to make this happen, and they've done that with nobody for them to call as their boss. It's entirely personal initiative. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I think what's awesome about this project is that we can just focus on what we enjoy doing, and that is building. Because the organizational overhead is just a minimum, and that's pretty much why it's great.
For sure. And I think that I speak for the entire community at this point. Early on, I just want to say thank you for all the hard work that you and your team has done. Sometimes it is thankless work, and like you said, being responsible to an anonymous group of stakeholders at time could have a lot of pressure in like a super unique, interesting way. And we're also talking about like hybrid money software, so like a lot of emotion gets wrapped into it. But you guys work endlessly, and so thank you just for that work. But onto our next question. There are a lot of community questions, and many of them could probably be answered simply by asking, where are we in terms of DCR DEX development from a bird's eye view?
Right. I think that's probably the most important thing that I want to talk to people about, and that's why I put up a Reddit post a few months ago just to keep people on the same page as us, the developers. But where we are presently is that DCR DEX 0.2, the second major release, was back in May. And that brought some great stuff, but primarily the initial set of Decredation, that's our GUI wallet, integration with DEX, among a lot of other improvements on top of 0.1. Did I lose you, Eduardo? Nope, I just flashed into a frozen screen again. So that was great. DCR DEX 0.2 added a lot of stability, a lot of UI improvements, and then the initial Decredation and integration. So right now, what we've been focusing on for quite a while, and still remains our top priority, is building a light, also known as SPV, wallet into the DEX user software, which is also called DEXc, the DEX controller. And this is really important because it eliminates the requirement for any external Bitcoin wallet software or a full node, which is just completely prohibitive to most people. And it also makes setup far easier. So SPV is all I really think about in terms of what we need for the next major release. And the second top priority is Decred SPV, not just Bitcoin. And this is important because most Decredation users who are using our GUI wallet are configured this way. And both of these are actually very nearly complete at the moment. So it's getting really exciting right now. But before we release the two SPV features, we're going to have an intermediate 0.3 version release to go with the upcoming 1.7 Decred release that's coming quite soon. But still, even without SPV, DCR DEX 0.3 has just a very large number of improvements that I'll get into later. And they touch on the client's internals as well as the user interface, which is basically the browser interface that it provides. And let's see, so the SPV support is going to land in 0.4. And that's actually going to follow quite soon after 0.3. And I'm going to say this is most likely going to be September or early October. We're pushing really hard to get SPV, the 0.4 release ready. And this is such a big milestone for the DCR DEX project that this may just become 1.0, because this is the big thing that we've been after. And almost all of this is written, presently going through review, but since it needs such a considerable amount of testing, it's not going to be in the 0.3 release that's upcoming pretty soon. And after that, then we're going to get Ethereum support. And that's been underway for quite a while, but that's going to come after SPV just in terms of priorities. So that's the high level. And just if I could really quick just tell you what's coming for 0.3, I'll just hit off the main bullet points because it's some pretty good stuff. The first is that we're going to have the client itself will have a restoration seed, much like wallet seed words. That's going to be used for creating and restoring the DEX client it's backing it up and restoring it on other computers. And that's a really important prerequisite for the built-in Bitcoin wallet. So I just wanted to mention that off the bat. We're also giving it internationalization, basically translations for the DEX client front end, the browser. So that's going to open it up, make it a lot more user friendly to people. We have a Brazilian translation, and we're going to shoot for a Chinese one as well, Brazilian Portuguese, and a bunch of other really nice under the hood features for the client as well, database optimizations, and some pretty cool UI features. One is that there's an option to remember the password when you log in, so you don't have to keep typing it in. You can export your order history to a table, among a lot of other good UI features. I just wanted to name a few. We also knocked off Bitcoin Cash support, although whether or not that's deployed to any DEX is a different question. And yeah, we solved a lot of the problems, the early prerequisites for SPV, and that's in this work as well. And we have the beginnings of Ethereum support. So we got a lot going on right now. 0.3 is coming soon. 0.4 not long after that, with the long-awaited, much anticipated SPV support. So that's where we are.
Thank you for that, high-level overview. Most of the questions from here on out are going to have been sourced from Twitter. So we'll start with this one is not. This one actually comes from me. But why is the DEX such a vital element to the Decred project's success? Can you explain from your perspective why the DEX is powerful and a necessary element?
Yeah, sure. I completely believe that it is. I mean, anyone who's been following the project at all, even a little bit, knows what an absolute, in my opinion, scandal the the centralized exchange listing situation has been with Decred. It's quite a mystery. You have a lot of smaller, less active projects all over the major exchanges, and Decred has really had an uphill battle in that regard. So in a very important way, DEX puts Decred in control of its own destiny by giving its users this alternative path, another path for trades. And incidentally, it's one that has far superior liquidity, privacy, and security. So I mean, it's a matter of solving the user interface and user experience issues, and it's just a win. And we've already seen very real effects of DCR DEX once it was initially released. All the trading volume, as evidenced by all the on-chain swap transactions, is visible. It's a large amount. It's massive. The books on DEX even right now are deep, and you can make large trades, buy or sell Decred with minimal slippage. And this is something that's been missing for quite some time for Decred.
Recently, regulators have been going after centralized exchanges, and DEXs have really come to the forefront of the conversation. What separates DCR DEX from other DEXs you have seen in the space?
Well, yeah, I mean, a lot. I mean, first and foremost, DCR DEX is not a service. It's open source software. Just try to put up an instance of ThorChain on your own, or block DX or something. It's not going to happen. Anyone can start a DCR DEX server and make a market for an asset pair. That's the kind of decentralization that's actually important. And when we get servers running in a mesh, it'll be the unstoppable kind of decentralization. Also, I think most other DEXs are just fundamentally rent seeking. And what this means is, the primary goal is to make a buck at the expense of the user. A common approach to actually make that work for the other DEXs is to have yet another blockchain, like a proxy blockchain or a utility token. And at the end of the day, that usually ends up adding a lot of complexity or a security risk and like a proxy asset. And in the most cases, they're just extra transactions that purely exist for the purposes of extracting fees to use that DEX network. Now, in all fairness, I think Ethereum DEXs are ones that are generally more straightforward, but cross-chain DEX options are quite a bit over-engineered from what we see generally, and designed to make money for an organization that either develops or runs it. We don't have that problem. And further, almost every DEX out there really involves your funds. This is important, going to somewhere other than the counterparty or yourself, out of the control of you or the counterparty. whether that's some kind of mega contract with like in a liquidity pool or Ethereum, a vault wallet or some multi-sig address that you don't fully control. As much as we like things like BISC, we've seen a lot of solutions to just jump through the multi-sig problem and call it trustless and non-custodial, but not in reality. So they usually pitch this in a different light, but this means you really give up custody for the swap. And while they can argue it's still decentralized, it doesn't make it trustless, and it does not make it non-custodial. DCRDEX is completely different. It's not involved at all the server in either party's transaction beyond matching the orders and relaying match data. That is it's like the most important thing to convey about the DCRDEX design. And no matter what the counterparty or the server doing the matching does, you're always in control of your funds. And that's not something that most other DEXs can say, especially not without a lot of complexity or utility tokens in the mix. So that's what I think is so special about DCRDEX design.
This question comes from well-known community member DCR Uncle, and I actually have some kind of questions within the question, because I'll just read the question, which is: atomic swap capability is needed to have an asset on the DEX. Are all atomic swap capabilities the same, or what exactly is required? Once an asset has atomic swap capability, what are the steps to get an asset added to the DEX?
Right. So all atomic swaps are not the same. However, there is a big set of them that are very similar. And what I mean is that an asset, if it's similar enough to the scripting capability of Bitcoin and Decred, it can be added fairly easily. Litecoin and Bitcoin Cash were added using what we call a Bitcoin clone package in the software. And there's some documentation on GitHub, or they can stop and chat with the DCRDEX developers to answer some questions on Matrix. But it depends.
How do we make the DCRDEX super user-friendly?
Yeah, this is, to me, one of the absolute most important questions. I'm not completely disconnected from the user. I pay attention on Twitter more than I probably should, and I understand that this is what's on everyone's mind, and it's actually what we're trying to complete, what we want. And while we talk about SPV a lot, not everyone really makes the connection between why SPV, built-in wallets and light wallets, are going to get us to the super user-friendly point, but that's the answer. To make all other grand UI and user experience design goals possible, we really have to eliminate this full node requirement, especially for Bitcoin, and integrate these wallets into the DEX client, DEXC that everyone uses, as much as possible. Otherwise, it's going to be prohibitive for people to set up. So without a stack of external wallet software, then we become free to consider lots of other distribution formats. And, for example, you could really think wildly and say, okay, the DEX client could even be compiled into maybe a WebAssembly binary for some dead simple web interface or browser extension that people could access very simply, with probably a lot of security trade-offs. But there's a lot of doors that open up when we start getting rid of the external software. And I think that answers some people's question. But the fact is, a lot of people want to go to something like dex.decred.org and just start trading right there without installing anything. Never mind where their funds reside, where they get sent for trades, or what third parties are involved. And I acknowledge that that's one thing. That's what a lot of people want. It's true. A lot of problems can be solved by making those kinds of compromises, but they are pretty nasty. And this is part of what I wanted to communicate, today, just so people understand why we apparently seem to be doing things the hard way and working from the ground up from principles of security, then working towards a good user experience. It's not just because we like torturing you. So the compromises that are generally made when you go to these websites, you're talking about custody, obviously. So trades settle instantly in centralized exchanges, aside from deposit and withdrawal transactions, which shouldn't be ignored. but you really handed over your funds in that situation. Centralization is another big thing that we want to avoid. So if you consider MetaMask, it uses this thing called Infura as a backend. It's super light, super fast browser extension, but there's like a major point of failure, and we've seen that that's gone down before and knocked off just about every Ethereum user. Privacy is another major concern, major design goal. For convenience, people accept that know your customer is just required on centralized exchanges, and in a lot of cases, even these instant exchanges that like Shapeshift and Changely. Similarly, using a light wallet like Electrum, you completely give up almost all of the information about your on-chain holdings to the Electrum servers. Most people don't even realize that or care. So privacy is a big thing that we're trying to maintain. And lastly, the other compromise we just don't want to make is security. This is obvious more and more every day. Wallets in browser extensions are just completely ubiquitous right now because web pages interact seamlessly with them. People love that. Apparently you can buy rocks from your browser, and people love that. But they're just extremely vulnerable to social engineering attacks and just leaking your identity and balance. It happens all the time. Some of your formal guests can tell you the exact same thing about MetaMask. Every day I read something. Mobile wallets are similarly risky. So I feel like I'm rambling right now, but it's important to understand why we're doing things the way we're doing and working from the ground up, from principles that check these boxes, and then we work towards a great user interface and user experience. And so I completely acknowledge to the Twitter masses that most people use these products and services because they're easy and fast, and I know that we can achieve this too, but we're going to do it in the right way. And really, this all comes down to using atomic swaps as the foundation for the product. And the trades settle privately, directly on the asset's decentralized network, without handing over any custody of the funds. And although it has been cumbersome in practice for a number of reasons, the biggest hindrance to broader adoption has been the need to set up these third-party nodes and wallets. And this is why I'm talking about this, because we're getting rid of this requirement. And also now Decredation, which is our graphical wallet, already installs and configures DEX to work with it. So we're getting rid of a lot of these stumbling blocks as we go. So the DEX client, one more thing, which runs on the user's machine, will have its own internal Bitcoin wallet. And the reason why we're now able to do that is because Bitcoin Core, which is the bulk of the nodes on the Bitcoin network, really finally now has broad support in the version 0.21 for the compact filters peer-to-peer service. And that's what's really making this practical now. So, yeah.
Would you say it? Is it fair to say that DCR DEX is the most cypher-punk DEX?
I don't know. I think you'd have to ask someone who's more OG than me, to be honest with you.
Fair enough.
I think we're holding true to the set of principles that I think probably matter the most to people who take cryptography and privacy seriously.
This next question comes from another well-known community member, Checkmate. Is it possible for DCR DEX to even further abstract away complexity via web interface? I.e., could DCR DEX function on a similar level of access as Uniswap, for example, with web interface and mobile wallets? You've kind of answered that already, but if you'd like to just answer Check's question specifically.
Oh yeah, I'm glad we were addressing his question specifically. He's very vocal, and I think he keeps us real in terms of our goals. Sometimes it's hard to convey, why doing such a thing like accessing, DEX to Decredation and just clicking trade is hard, maybe not perfectly secure. But the short answer is, in addition to what I just said, the short answer is anything is possible, but there are going to be trade-offs, and the built-in Bitcoin wallet is going to get us a lot closer to doing what he wants. I don't think it's going to be something that's going to be in a mobile app or a browser extension anytime soon, but we're moving towards something much simpler to use, and it's coming very soon. Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say, except for that, we're just going to continue to solve the technical challenges that allow us to make the user interface better.
What is the biggest opportunity for improvement in Decred right now?
Um, yeah, that's a tie between awareness and accessibility, in my opinion. Um, yeah, I mean, we know exactly what needs to be done to make the Decred software more user friendly. It just takes time to do it right without making the compromises that I've rambled on about. The awareness issue really needs no further explanation. I think anyone who's been a Decred holder or stakeholder for a long time is more or less baffled by why getting traction in the media and crypto or mainstream is such a challenge. But we can work on the things that we're capable of addressing ourselves internally, and that is making the software more accessible. And hopefully awareness comes with it.
This question comes from Unimer1. What's your most optimistic take on Lightning integration into the DEX?
Yep. I have to say that I think we need to have a conversation with Matthew on that, because he's the one who's been really leading the Lightning Network for Decred development. But it is operational, so I think it should be feasible. I think what we'll really get out of it probably is smaller volume, smaller size trades, and much more instantaneous. But I'm afraid I can't really say what it's going to take to get that done with DCRDEX.
This question comes, this is a new questioner, so shout out to Hong Dao VIP. How does the DEX enhance liquidity?
Yeah. Well, I mean, my opinion is that when the centralized exchanges are the gatekeepers, we lose. And the DEX has already shown has already enhanced liquidity. I mean, you only have to look at the on-chain swap volume to see that, since launch to see that. More important than volume is that you can go on the DEX now and either buy or sell, say 1,000 Decred with minimal slippage. That's real liquidity. Trading volume means jack compared with, the depth of the order books, and we have that now.
Will there be stable coins on the DEX?
Yeah, so that's on the phase 2 project that we've been working on, and after Ethereum native ETH is implemented, ERC20 tokens are planned, and that's going to start with USDC. That said, just more and more lately, I have been having serious concerns about ETH as a secure platform, as well as the centrally controlled stablecoins like Tether and USDC. Still, I mean, by the way, these may or may not last, and they both presently have blacklists for accounts that they can control. So these are things that I understand are important, but we should be aware of that. So that said, stablecoin markets are a major portion of Decred's trading volume on centralized exchanges. So it's important. But more than that, I see the value in just ETH support on DCR DEX to bridge UTXO land with the ecosystem. So once you get into ETH, you're readily available. You have swap markets for all the tokens built on Ethereum, if that's your thing. But yeah, stablecoins are in the works, but we need to exercise caution. So we're working towards ETH first, and we're going to get that done.
This is kind of a question that was not planned, but is there a stable coin that you do like?
Not particularly, no.
Okay. What other protocols plan to be implemented after the Ethereum implementation is done?
Yeah, I mean that's unknown right now. We don't have a definitive one lined up, but I would say maybe Monero. I've done a little research on the latest Monero swap protocols that have been getting implemented, I think, by the Comet network, and it does seem like something that we can implement is feasible. its implementation itself of the swap protocol, as well as the integration into DCR DEX, are unfortunately they're orders of magnitude more complex in contrast with Bitcoin-like coins. But it's something that can be done. However, I think a higher value project for DCR DEX development is a mesh, and putting multiple servers in a decentralized configuration. However, I mean, that said, multiple teams can pursue multiple projects simultaneously. It just needs organization and proposals for funding and approval.
Could you, for someone who's maybe not as technical like myself, maybe flesh out a little bit more? Why would you say the mesh is a higher value project to pursue immediately?
Yeah, so resilience of the DCR DEX in general. So like I've said, so first and foremost, it's open source software. It's not a service, so anyone can fire up a server. But really, well, that's not a lot of good if you fragment the order books. So the real end game is to have a network that's hard to take off, a shared order book, so that you can essentially perform swaps without relying on a single server that may or may not need to be replaced or superseded by another one.
Thank you. This question was a little confusing for me. It comes from Tom65360166. He asks, will it be considered later to develop market API and transaction API that are easy to develop, can be used to quantify transactions?
Yeah, I guess I'm gonna have to make an assumption about what's being asked there as well. I think by market API, I think if it's asking, is there an API like an HTTP API to get trade historical volume and price data? Yes, right now we have a read-only market API, but it has limited data, and by limited I mean there's just a few bin sizes for volume and price. We can expand on that. Now for transaction API, all the actual trades have to be done through the WebSocket, and that's an open protocol. But I think what you mean for a transaction API is to actually see and audit, the actual trades and the on-chain data. So that can be done, but it needs planning. So for now, what I've actually implemented is a couple command line tools, which I call swap scan, and I put those into the DCR data repository, which is a completely separate project. And that will scan the Decred and Bitcoin blockchains completely independently of the DCR DEX software or databases and search for the transactions. And it will link the two by what we call the secret key that actually is common to the two transactions and defines the atomic swap. And that they work independently of DCR DEX, and this is kind of one of the it gets to the point of what is decentralized about the design of DCR DEX. You can actually find this stuff on chain every single trade without even asking the DCR DEX servers or protocol. There's just no need to take an exchange's word for the reported trading volume, since you just have to look at the on-chain data. And I think by the way, fake trading volume on centralized exchanges is just common knowledge, and it's kind of a joke almost. And that's not really a trouble with DCR DEX. You can look on chain and you can see and verify what the server will say is actually happening. I know. Eventually, I think I'd like to see these tools turn into much like a block explorer, call it a swap explorer, where it links, shows linked transactions on the two different chains, Bitcoin and Decred. That'd be pretty cool eventually, and I think that can happen. So hopefully that answers Tom's question.
How close are integrations on the DEX with ERC20 tokens, and how will this enhance DCR as a currency ecosystem, in your opinion?
Yeah. So how close? As I said, we're focusing almost all our efforts in SPV. ETH has been underway, and it's going to happen. It's going to happen this year. It's part of the phase 2 development. But as a matter of commentary, I think DCX is primarily going to be a bridge between layer 1 chains, like Bitcoin, Decred, Ethereum. But it's never going to be a marketplace for ETH tokens like Uniswap is. or other ETH-centric junk out there right now. So I think trading one ERC20 for another, or even ERCs for ETH, seems to be well addressed by existing solutions out there already. What we're going to be essentially gaining with DCR DEX is being able to trade between the layer ones, between ETH and Decred. Yeah.
So this question is, I would say, very timely given all the topic, I mean, all the chatter around NFTs. Is it possible to buy an NFT with DCR through an atomic swap? So
Yeah.
I guess that would be like going from DCR to Ethereum, then to an ERC 721. Is something like that even technically possible?
No, I mean that's it's an amusing question, but it's also a good question, I think, because it is what's on, what's the buzz right now. Anything is possible, but it really doesn't seem like we have this out of the box. I'm not really, to be honest, I'm not really sure, what fundamental properties are required to implement an NFT. I understand, how exactly they generally work, but it would be interesting to see a formal definition of an NFT in terms of the inherent properties and the required network and blockchain interactions that are necessary to actually, make one happen. And I don't know, perhaps that's formalized somewhere, but I'm not really aware of that. I think it's probably a question of how can our script language be used, maybe together with time locks or something, to emulate the kind of contracts that you see driving the NFTs on Ethereum. But I think it's kind of a wild question. It could be an interesting one for a Politeia proposal. Some enterprising developer could come up with a way that would bring NFTs to Decred. I don't know. So.
What can we do as a community to advance merchant adoption?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I think about that sometimes, quite often, actually. I mean, I'm not sure if the question is actually for Decred in general, merchant adoption, or if this is saying what can DCR DEX do for that. So I guess I'll think about both. To me, I think integration of the Decred stack into maybe the the BTC Pay server seems like a good place to start. Others have considered this a lot more than I have, but I mean, that's probably the most common open source payment processor out there. The DCR DEX can make a merchant adoption more appealing if, for example, that merchant wanted to accept payment and then immediately or relatively quickly convert it to another asset. But I don't know. I think starting with implementing Decred support for BTC Pay server or something like that would be a good place to start. I'm not really sure why it's not available yet, to be honest with you.
That question comes from Mad Skrilla 1. I'd like to just tell him thank you for that question. This one is a bit out of left field, I think, just given what I know about you. But what are your thoughts on discrete log contracts and some of the derivatives they enable? Example, DCR denominated and settled futures. And this question comes from the Bochinchero, a regular of the Decred in Depth live show. So thank you, Bochinchero.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know a whole lot about DLCs. I've seen a few articles about it. They're not new, but I understand that it's an interesting approach using Schnorr signatures. But if my understanding is correct, I know that there's oracles involved in using them, and I think that makes it it introduces an element of risk into it. But I'm kind of talking on my ass at this point. I think I think there's probably solutions to that, but it seems like there's some risk involved. So, but honestly, I should just say I don't know.
This question, actually, I did not put down who asked this, but will it one day be possible to have the same functionality of Decrediton wallet available on iOS/Android? If so, how long? So I assume this person wants to be able to access the DEX and have Lightning, because I know that Raider Group just pushed mixing into their mobile wallet. So what are your thoughts on the same functionalities being available on iOS and Android?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I talked a little bit about the possibilities for DEX trades on mobile. That's a little, that's almost, if there's anything I would call intractable, it might be that, for a lot of reasons. But I mean, I think the Android developer app made by the Rada Group has been pretty well received. So I don't really know how Decredation fits onto that question because there's already this mobile app. I think they just mean the mobile app in general. Um, I mean, because there's no trusted third party that takes custody of your funds in an atomic swap, uh, it's a peer-to-peer process to do the trade. Uh, there's no liquidity pools that you send your money into like you do with Ethereum swaps, probably Thor too. Your software has to stay online to play an active role. So I mean that to me that raises questions of connectivity, device reliability, and I guess how long you're willing to stay with your phone online in case, for example, the counterparty backs out and you have to process a refund after a certain number of hours. And this can be done on a mobile device, but it's riskier and it carries a different set of engineering challenges, I think, like I said, related to connectivity and battery life and just, the idiosyncrasies of mobile operating systems and how they like to shut down your background apps and so forth. So I don't know. I don't want to say, are you kidding me? Like, why we're never doing this, but it's not a near term goal.
What are your thoughts on promotion plans for the DCR DEX? Obviously, you're not a marketing guy. There's been,
Obviously not.
well, I didn't mean, I didn't mean it like that. I meant because you're a software developer. But even questions in the chat right now about, Decred needs more marketing, and I guess the question is, would you consider increasing the promotional and budget manpower? Is that something you'd like to see? Would you like to see, maybe some sort of proposal that focuses just on marketing the DEX? What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, that's a fair question. I don't know. I've never really figured out how I feel about marketing because we have spent a good deal on marketing in the past to see very, very minimal results. I think right now we have, a good liaison right now, Lindsay, I guess, and I don't know what spending huge boatloads on marketing is going to do for us. But also, part of me thinks that, like, I think timing is an important thing to consider. So, if we get to DCR DEX 1.0 and everyone's saying, "Holy crap! Like SPV, this is like so easy. I don't have to install anything. And it's just it. All I have to do is sit there and like wait for the trade to settle. I don't have to install Bitcoin anymore." Everyone just, maybe then I think a PR blitz might make some kind of sense. It's hard to say, but I don't know. I try to just do what I know, and that's coding.
Fair, fair. Yeah, and my, I just kind of want to put my thoughts about the marketing. I have, I when I first started joining the Decred project, we had hired a marketing, or Decred had hired a marketing firm. But I really like the approach that, I consider myself part of the marketing team. To answer Carlos's question, was that Carlos? Yes, yeah. So, I consider myself part of the marketing team, and I think this like kind of grassroots marketing, like this organic marketing, I find it to be, a little bit more powerful and maybe a little bit more palpable. But
Yeah.
I'm interested. So those were all the pre-planned questions, and so these last few questions come from the chat. This question, David Butcher. What is the situation with regard to the? And I know that these have probably been answered before, but maybe you just don't mind answering them here now as well.
Oh.
What is the situation with regard to the DEX in terms of front running, transactions, reordering, and consensus instability outlined by the Flash Boys 2.0? Is this avoidable, or do we face similar risk? I'm not sure what he means by Flash Boys 2.0, but the rest of the question I understand, and maybe you could just answer that more thoroughly.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is something that was considered from day zero in the design, the spec for the DEX in terms of how the matching is performed on the server. I think the best thing to do if you have questions about that is look at the original specification and look at the epoch-based app matching algorithm. And there's some pretty clever elements to that make it very, very difficult, if not impossible, for the server or a counterparty to somehow gain an advantage and do things like front running or outright reordering I think that's what you're talking with reordering. You're talking about the queue of incoming orders and the matching. It's a very fair system that prevents a lot of the trading abuses. I guess if I could make it as non-technical as possible, I'd say that there's short windows of time called epochs, say like 10 seconds, where all incoming orders go into basically a queue. Each one of them has a magic number tagged into it. Nobody knows, and there's a corresponding number that derives from that all the individual users have. When the epoch closes, the server requests all these numbers, verify those numbers match, and then performs a shuffling on that epoch queue. And because this is provable that you didn't have that information at the time that the orders were placed, you know that it's actually a fair shuffle. Nobody knew the order that epoch queue was going to be in at the close of the epoch. And then that shuffled queue essentially gets matched one by one with the existing order book. So it basically makes all these kinds of abuses almost impossible. And that actually has an interesting effect too. Like if you place an order and immediately try to cancel it in the same epoch, there's no guarantee that you're actually going to be able to do that. So you can't trick everybody else into thinking, oh, hey, look, there's an order right there, I should take it. Little do they know it's going to be canceled right away. The person who put it up doesn't know they can cancel it before your order first matches with it. So it's a very fair system. I mean, I'm probably making people more confused at this point. But I would look at the specification for the DEX, and namely the matching algorithm and the pre-image collection that is defined for each order.
I'm going to ask you one serious question and then one troll question before we head out of here. The serious question is from Brian Lee, who in the chat, he says, I know it's a long ways off, but do you have any intuition about whether Taproot on Bitcoin would be something the DCR DEX implements for swaps?
Yeah, I don't know how to answer that. I'm sorry. Okay. I'm just gonna be honest with you.
Fair enough. And then you probably won't know how to answer this one anyways as well, which this comes from Eddie, who's asked twice now, when Coinbase?
Yeah. Well, that's a question that I'm hoping to make irrelevant.
I love that answer.
Yeah, I don't know.
Hilarious.
Tuesday next week.
Jonathan, this will be an invaluable piece of content for the community members to listen to hear where everything's at. Thank you for taking the time to come on and update us. Is there anything in closing that you'd like to say? Anything that I didn't ask that I should have been thinking about?
I mean, nothing in particular, but I just want to say thanks for the opportunity. I mean, I try to keep the community kind of up to date and informed about what we're doing and why we're doing it. And I don't want stakeholders to think that we're just shutting out the input, and I don't want there to be a huge gap between people like Checkmate and myself that look at the big, Checkmate and others, Nino, look at the big picture and see like, okay, this is what needs to be done for acceptance and adoption, and there's a big gap between getting that and how we get there. And I'm hoping that I can just try to make that clear how we're going to make that leap for all those things, and whether or not those leaps are even possible. So I mean, I appreciate being able to come on here, and I hope that I shed some light on the issues for all those people.
Absolutely, and I think that the point you've made about those values of privacy, custodianship, the ones centralization, security, I think those were very important. And like you said, being principled first, and software takes time. And me and you have talked previously, and I just want the rest of the community members to know. We are not going to ask any questions on Thorchain in this viewing, but maybe with Jonathan's approval, he may allow me to post, or he may post somewhere, his thoughts about Thorchain integration. But we decided to not have that be part of today's stream. So thank
Yeah,
you.
I guess it was only, a thought about that because there was a community question I saw on Twitter. But I did want to, focus on what we're doing, and I think that's important. But if people want to talk about the ecosystem as a whole, that's something we can consider offline.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for your time, and I look forward to the next time whenever I get to chat with you.
Yeah, thank you.
Take care.
Bye bye.